Mountaineer Nation, it is good to be back talking with you about West Virginia University football. I know I was caught up there for many few weeks there with the end of the exhilarating WVU baseball season and getting into the postseason, winning a regional. But now that season has ended in the super regional rounds and coming to the conclusion with the College World Series, it is finally time to get back to talking about West Virginia football. Now, we still have some 2 odd months, which are going to go so painstakingly slow before we're going to be talking about kickoff and actual game action when the Mountaineers kick off their season against Robert Morris in a non-conference battle at Mountaineer Field. But for right now, it's MAG season, so we can say it's not Big 12 Media Day yet, so that's really when I consider it the unofficial kickoff of the college football world for 2025. Had some chance in the last week or so to go down and explore a Mountaineers' favorite travel destination, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Love it down there and love getting to see all the different flying WVs that I see. Even though I have some Mountaineer bars down there, so that was great. But gave me some time, a little bit, to read Lindy's magazine. And after reading some of the content in here, seeing some of the other things online about other publications like Athlon and Phil Steele, I know I'm about a week out from some of the other YouTube content creators who have actually already talked about this with the magazines dropping there at the beginning of last week. But I got to weigh in as I've been able to kind of fully digest this, read about what they have to say about specifically the Mountaineers, specifically about the Big 12, and then about the entire country and get to review some of the rosters, the narratives, things like that. So if you haven't already heard, West Virginia is picked, according to Lindy's here, 14th out of 16 teams in the Big 12. That's not good. 66th in the country, which, remember, we're talking about over 100 FBS teams, but we don't care about what goes on in the Sun Belt and the Mountain West and the MAC. We care about specifically what's happening in the Big 12, but the Power 4 at large. So to see West Virginia being ranked lower than our hated Pitt Panthers, hated Virginia Tech Hokies, teams I also don't really like in Louisville and Maryland, it's like, I can't stand that. So, title of this week's episode, and thanks for tuning in, I'm Carson Fox for another edition of Fox on West Virginia Mountaineer Sports, is where the national media is already getting it wrong with WVU. And there were some positives, so I'll lead with the good and then talk about some of the bad and things that I think that they're missing. One of the good things is there is a lot of praise here in this Lindy's magazine for Jaheim White. Love that. Big 12 second teamer, listed in their superlatives as the hardest to tackle in the Big 12. Awesome to see for him. A guy, if you've seen some pictures of him on social media in the last week, looks like he's put on a ton of weight. So ready to take on a boatload of carries, maybe over 240. If we're projecting perhaps 20 carries a game for him. This is going to be Jaheim White's legacy season. I mean, and if he sticks around for another senior season or has another year's worth of eligibility, we could be talking about a big year, I feel like, for Jaheim White. Also, of all of the coaches in the entire country that were hired this past offseason, Rich Rodriguez got a 10 out of 10 grade, the highest ranking grade of any coaching hire in college football by Lindy's magazine. So that's awesome to see, saying that it was a perfect fit. And in reality, I think that grade weighs upon the optimism, and I think that's what many fans, including myself, are really banking on, is that Coach Rodriguez, 17 years later, can strike lightning in a bottle once again, develop the kind of hard edge mentality, get players to hold the rope, all the other different taglines that program had during that point in time, spot the ball, go at 100 miles an hour or faster, 7 seconds or fewer. And that's really, I think, some of the positives. But for the most part, looking at these different rankings, seeing UCF ahead of them, a UCF program that completely had to gut its roster, just like how West Virginia had to and rehired Scott Frost. a Cincinnati program that West Virginia beat this past season, a Kansas team that West Virginia beat this past season, Houston, who only won, 4 games this past year. It's just like, I don't know where the national media is getting this idea. And as I went back and forth with some national media members right when I was starting this channel a couple of years ago, y'all, West Virginia has won 4 or more games every single year since Rich Rodriguez's first year in 2001. And what I mean to tell you today is I think there are reasons for optimism. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself and kind of, blow out the ammunition, some of the content that I'd like to talk to you all about later in the summer. But I think there's a lot of, there's more pros than cons than there were even with this transition. Now, don't get it twisted. 74 new newcomers. Some players on this team from last year who really were up-and-coming players in college football, and I think also, a guy like C.J. Donaldson, who I think was kind of a bit of a household name, especially in the Big 12 conference, but I mean, is going to play for Ohio State. I really do think, if at worst, he's like a 2 running back to another one that Ohio State can pull. But really, I've been a CJ fan since the Pitt game in 2022 when I was there at Acrisure Stadium, his first collegiate game, and he popped off for like 18 yards per carry. But the replacements that Coach Rodriguez and staff made at a multitude of positions, I don't think that there's going to be this huge dramatic drop-off in which we're saying that West Virginia can't contend at all in all of the games that it's playing on this schedule, because for the most part, West Virginia avoids some of these heavier hitters who I think are going to finish within the top 5 to 6 in this conference. They don't have Baylor on their schedule. They don't have Iowa State on their schedule. They don't have Kansas State. They don't have, and then they have Texas Tech. But I just think like the schedule is all going to filter down first and foremost to the Pitt game, the Backyard Brawl, September 13th, 9/13, of course, of all dates. That it's going to come down to that at 3:30 kickoff game that I know a lot of fans would love to see it being a night game. And then we're going to go from there. I think that game's going to be able to tell a whole lot. Now, West Virginia is playing a lot of teams with returning starting quarterbacks. So that's where kind of the end-all, be-all starts when you're evaluating a team on paper for the upcoming seasons. Do you have a returning quarterback? How good is your starting quarterback? And I do truly think if Nico Marchiol is the starting quarterback, and that's kind of where my money is on right now on June 20th, and I think that every game in which Nico has played a majority of the game, or come in and been a very focal point of the game, going all the way back to 2022 when West Virginia was trying to finish out in a rainstorm against the Oklahoma State Cowboys in the season finale. He's a winner. He wins. He commands the best out of his teammates, and he goes out there and he can give you more than just what we saw in that Cincinnati game this past year. I think that alongside the kind of the management of Garrett Green over the course of his 5 seasons in Morgantown, I think Neil Brown could have managed Nico Marchiol through these first 3 seasons that he's had with him a little bit differently. But in the opportunities, I think first and foremost that Arizona game this past year, also the Texas Tech win in 2023, Nico Marchiol is just truly a winner. So I think the national media doesn't know who Nico Marchiol is, looking at him, and he's not a true starting returner, in comparison to what Garrett Green was. So I think that's where what the national media is missing the mark on West Virginia's quarterback. But even bigger than that, which you can't tell on paper, and which you can't and look at last year's statistics and anything like that, and this has been a narrative since the first day that Rich Rodriguez was hired, is the attitude adjustment, is the culture, is the hard edge mentality that's going to lead to earned success. And can't get over that quote that he had, I think, on his introductory either conversation with the team before the Scooters Frisco Coffee Bowl, which, by the way, when I was down in Myrtle Beach, I passed one of those and was, I don't know if it was either like just finishing construction or just starting up, but I saw that and was like, hey, I got to go there and get me one of those because I haven't seen them in the bowl game. But anyway, a lot of different good coffee options down there in Myrtle Beach, might I add. But the attitude adjustment to this hard edge mentality, and it, to go back to what I think there was a quip back and forth between Matt Moore on his departure out of the program when he took, basically I think was kind of told like, sorry, but there's the door. He found his way down to Virginia Tech and kind of blasted Rich Rodriguez on the way out about, being hard edge and stuff like that. I really think it came down on the defensive side of the ball more so than the offensive side of the ball. I think that offensive line in particular developed through 2022 to 2024. Got some big-time recruits in there in Doug Nestor, Wyatt Milam, and Zach Frazier. So I'm not necessarily as critical on the offensive side of the ball. I am on the defensive side of the ball. That this defense has just been way too soft, way too much of a, we're going to be reactionary and comparatively to, being proactive. And I think that's kind of my second point in here with that, is I love everything that I'm hearing from Zach Alley. I haven't heard a whole lot of him, but then went on the Three Guys Before the Game podcast with Tony Caridi and Hoppy Kirchville and Brad Howe, and I loved hearing what he had to say about how physical they're going to be, how they are going to try and scheme to the opponent each and every week so that another team isn't going to be able to say, oh, this is what West Virginia does. They are going to bring an entirely different look to each opponent each week. And now they have personnel that they can rotate in. So if they want to be, more heavy on the defensive line and in their linebacking core, they can do that. And then in the secondary in the same way. And I do think I really feel confident in Michael Coates. I feel really confident in Fred Perry. So is there going to be another member of the secondary, maybe even more than one, who are guys who are really going to impress in fall camp and then show out there in those first couple of games and then are going to be able to go mano-a-mano with Kenny Johnson or whomever, Sincere Lee, or whoever, Desmond Reed, whoever Eli Holstein wants to try and throw to in that backyard brawl. So I love that, and Travis Trickett, having coached against Zach Alley's defenses, I think when their time was in the Sun Belt, hardest coach he's ever had to coach against. So I like that. I like that West Virginia made this an investment into Zach Alley. Could be a guy who's a candidate on the rise for a head coaching position down the line. He's young. Wish he would have brought over a few more players from Oklahoma in the transfer portal, but neither here nor there at this point in time. But the physicality that I think that we're going to see on the defensive side of the ball, especially out of members in the secondary, that is what was so good about, I'm going to pick here on the 2007 defense in that Fiesta Bowl against Oklahoma. Sam Bradford, of then next year future Heisman winning quarterback, had absolutely no idea where different players were coming from. And to help Zach Alley is going to be Jeff Castile, a guy who ran West Virginia's defense for almost half a decade or more, while Rich Rodriguez wasn't. I think he even stayed over whenever Bill Stewart was hired, before eventually Tony Gibson took those defensive coordinator reins. I think Jeff Castile ended up going to Nevada, if my memory serves me correct. But he's going to have a veteran coach that he can bounce ideas off, game plan. Maybe there's some times where Alley wants to be a little more aggressive, Jeff Castile being a little more conservative. Didn't help that 2006 defense, but I think that there will be a nice meeting of the minds between the two. The others that he has camaraderie with, rapport with from his time at Jacksonville State, and then Oklahoma. So I really like where this defensive staff is kind of taking place and the different pieces that they're going to have to be able to have interchangeable parts. Would I like more 300-pound plus linemen on this team? Of course. You know that is the number one thing, if you followed my channel for the last 2 years, that I would love to see West Virginia have more of. But I think the guys that we're going to see more of the physical hitting. Maybe it leads to more penalties, which I'm totally understandable with if it means that they're going to be hit sticking like a Carl Joseph or like a Bruce Irvin out of Jamori Robinson. I want this team to be nasty. I want them to play to the letter of the law, to the legal limits of the game, as Bill Stewart would say back in those days. And that's what I hope that they unleash. A type of ferocity, tenacity, and blue-collar hard work. And if you're ever dogging it at all, you're going to be off the field for someone else who wants this playing time. And there are players who I know come the end of fall camp that are going to be listed second string who are chomping at the bit to get onto the field in starting reps. So from that perspective, the toughness that's going to come, and what Zach Alley's going to bring to the table, and then the different types of looks that he's going to present to different teams, I'm very excited for. Last thing, and this was something that if you followed me over the last couple of years talking about Neil Brown's offenses, that absolutely freaking drove me crazy, was just the slow tempo. We're going to window dress for 35 seconds of the play clock every single snap. We're going to go on these maybe double-digit minute drives, like that Iowa State game absolutely drove me crazy this past year, and that they're going to try and, go up-tempo once again, run the ball. We're going to see a lot of running, and once this, again, I think it's going to be upwards of 50 to 60% of the offense is going to be on the ground, and then they're going to want to try and go faster. Now, I think it's easier to go slower than faster, so if that kind of predicated all into the game plan that Neil Brown had to try and keep West Virginia's defenses off the field, if that was the game plan and the strategy, we saw it didn't work. So I would rather go back to a high-flying, up-tempo, high-powered offense that has the potential to score more points within a game. That's where I think the ideology that Neil Brown had from first day of hire, pre-hire, of trying to make West Virginia a defensive first, let's play amazing special teams, let's slow games down like Iowa. No, that is not West Virginia. West Virginia is high-flying offense, has been since, granted, I've seen those old Don Nehlen offenses in 3 yards and a cloud of dust. But there were some really good offenses there, during his tenure in the early 80s with Oliver Luck, and then to Jeff Hostetler, of course, Major Harris taking them to a national championship game, the 93 team, the Mark Bulger years, transitioning in, the late 2000s with early 2000, that was his last year, with Avon Coburn, and then the transition came to Rich Rodriguez, who turned what was predominantly a, base, Michigan-like, run the ball down your throat kind of offense into, the modern day spread of which we know now. So can that be installed? How quickly is that going to take? I think your defense is, at least early on, is going to be a little bit further ahead than your offense. But where I think that the media is missing the mark here on Nico Marchiol. Yes, they give their props to Jaheim White, but West Virginia did a good job in the transfer portal, especially in the spring, bringing in a Jalen Knighton, bringing in a Cannon Katzer, Sincere Bauer. So there are different options that West Virginia can really go about 4 deep at that running back position, maybe 5. And then at the wide receiver position, it's just going to be something that, works itself out. I feel very confident in the abilities of Cam Vaughn. And maybe right up there with Michael Coates, Jamori Robinson is maybe the top 3 most important transfers for this team this offseason, in coming in and replacing the hole that Hudson Clement left, that he's going to be able to fill that, I think, magnificently, and the deep threat ability that he has. And then they're going to kind of figure it out there and plug and play guys at the 2 and 3s. Now, The evolution of the offense, I'm going to save for a later video. And what West Virginia needs to do to be the best kind of offense that it can be, I'll make in a separate video from this one. But for now, on paper, I just think the national media is underselling West Virginia. Yes, I think there will be some growing pains. I think there will be some losses that we're frustrated by. I think there will be a disappointing loss or two that we're just like, you can't have that, like 2023 with Houston. But right now, on paper, I think there's a lot to be optimistic for, that I think that the national media is just completely missing the mark and looking at other teams, because there are a lot of teams nationally, maybe outside, more so outside of the Big 12, that are replacing quarterbacks. So there's a lot of this I feel like sometimes happens, is that like the top contenders, have a year where they have returning starters coming in and will make their mark, so we kind of know what we're getting with them. But then it all seems like they all kind of hit it once, that the next year they have they're breaking in new starters for the first season, and we don't know necessarily what to look for in them. I'm looking at a team like Ohio State. I'm looking at a team like Oregon. I'm looking at Oklahoma. That's just three that come to my head just off the top of my head. But there are more programs out there like that will be in the national top 25 that they're looking at comprehensively from the roster outside of the quarterback. And I think West Virginia, if it's Nico Marchiol, if it's Jalen Henderson, are going to be okay in that regard, that there won't be this dramatic drop-off from this past season with Garrett Green, who had a pretty mediocre senior year, unfortunately, but had a really good junior year. So I'd love to know your thoughts. Good, bad, or indifferent, please leave your comments here on YouTube. How are you feeling right now on June 20th? Have you gotten any of these national magazines like Lindy's, Athlon, or Phil Steele? Anything that you've been able to pull from them that you like, you don't like, you think maybe they're missing the mark, underselling them? Or is it just like in a total wait-and-see mode, which I especially am about this offensive line? And then you're going to be able to more accurately evaluate this team, especially come week 1, but as we learn more about what happens in the August camp. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. Love to hear your feedback. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your dog. I do this each and every week and have a lot of fun doing it. Hail West Virginia. Let's go.